My name is Rick Donnelly. I'm 62 years old, and until this morning I was the Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Manufacturing. I'd been with the company for 15 years. When I joined, we were a struggling family business with 3 small factories in Cincinnati. Now we're a publicly traded company with 18 plants across the Midwest. I was proud of the work we'd done. I helped navigate the company through 2 recessions, an acquisition crisis, and more boardroom politics than I care to remember, and I wasn't flashy. I didn't schmooze investors at cocktail parties, but the numbers were always right, the books were always clean, and we never missed a filing deadline on my watch. Then came Travis Mercer. He was 36, with designer blazers and expensive sneakers. The board brought him in 3 months ago as CEO, and he swept through our offices like a tornado. He talked about synergy, disruption, and realigning vision. I knew what was coming when he scheduled our first one-on-one meeting. "The market's changing, Rick," he said, leaning back in my chair, with his feet propped on my desk. "We need someone who speaks the language of modern finance." I said nothing, just nodded once and offered a tight-lipped handshake. "We're bringing in Zachary Hughes," he continued, "a brilliant mind. He did a TEDx talk on financial innovation. It's getting real traction online." "I see," I said. My voice was steady. "When's the transition?" 2 weeks. "We'll announce it at the next board meeting." I didn't argue, I didn't fight it, I didn't even flinch. I packed my personal items that afternoon while everyone else was in an all-hands meeting about our exciting new direction. 15 years at Meridian, and everything fit in a single cardboard box. Family photos, a commemorative coin from our IPO, the leather portfolio my wife Patricia gave me before she passed. On my way out, I saw Bethany from accounts holding back, tears by the elevator. She'd been with me since day one. "Don't worry," I told her. "It's all part of the cycle." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly documenting a series of questionable transactions that had started, appearing in our books shortly after Travis arrived, and they grew more frequent after he mentioned bringing in Zachary Hughes. I wasn't planning revenge. I was just doing my job, keeping the books clean. I grew up working in my father's hardware store in Covington, Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati. He taught me that numbers don't lie, even when people do. I put myself through college stocking shelves and balancing the store's books at night. When I graduated, I turned down bigger offers to stay local, working my way up through regional companies until Meridian's founder, Harold Phillips, called me personally in 2008. "I need someone who can keep us afloat through this recession," he said. "Someone who sleeps better when the books balance." For 10 years, Harold and I built Meridian into something solid. When he retired, the transition was smooth. The new CEO, Diana Wright, respected the systems we'd created. We disagreed sometimes, but she listened. We grew steadily. No flashy moves, just solid business practices and clean accounting. Then Diana retired, and the board wanted fresh energy. Enter Travis Mercer, with his Harvard MBA and a stint at a Silicon Valley startup that had more buzz than profit. The first red flag came during his second week when he bypassed our procurement protocols to hire a marketing consultant, his former classmate, at 4 times our standard rate. When I questioned it, he smiled. "We're thinking bigger now, Rick. The old constraints don't apply." The second flag came when he restructured our reporting lines, so finance had to go through his new chief innovation officer before reaching him. The third came when I overheard him telling someone on the phone that our books had a lot of outdated methodology that needed creative solutions. I started watching more closely. Small irregularities appeared, vendor contracts with companies I couldn't properly vet, consultancy fees without deliverables, budget reallocations without department head signatures. My team noticed too. Kevin from Internal Audit stopped by one evening as I was reviewing the quarterly statements. "Something's off with the new tech investment tracking," he said quietly. "Numbers don't match from entry to report. Document everything." I told him to keep it factual. Patricia would have told me to make waves, to stand up in a board meeting, but cancer took her 3 years ago, and without her fire, I'd grown more methodical, more patient. Instead of confrontation, I kept detailed records, downloaded suspicious transactions, cross-referenced irregularities, while maintaining the same calm demeanor in meetings. Even as Travis brought in more of his people and pushed out mine, I wasn't being paranoid. The patterns were too consistent. Something bigger was happening, and it centered around this new finance wonderkin, Zachary Hughes. My final board meeting lasted exactly 22 minutes. There was no mention of my 15 years of service, no thank you speech, no plaque or watch, just a line on the agenda that read, CFO Transition Update. Travis spoke about exciting new fiscal directions, while I sat silently at the far end of the table. The chairman, William Foster, couldn't quite meet my eyes. He'd been on the board when Harold hired me. Now, he simply nodded along with Travis's presentation about how Zachary Hughes would revolutionize our approach to capital allocation. I'd hoped for at least some acknowledgement from William, some recognition of what we'd built together. Instead, the meeting moved briskly to the next agenda item, the new headquarters Travis wanted to build downtown. As everyone filed out, William paused briefly by my chair. You've been an asset, Rick, he said awkwardly, patting my shoulder. Best of luck. I walked back to my office, Zachary's office now, to collect my box. Through the glass wall, I could see Travis showing him around, pointing at the graphs on my walls like they were ancient cave paintings. Bethany was waiting by my door, holding an envelope. The accounting department took up a collection, she said, for a proper send-off dinner. I thanked her, knowing I wouldn't use it. As she turned to leave, I asked, Bethany, when did those invoices from Vertex Solutions start coming in? She thought for a moment. February, I think. Right after Mr. Mercer announced the Digital Transformation Initiative. February. 2 weeks before Travis first mentioned bringing in Zachary. That night at home, I spread all my documentation across my dining room table. 6 months of suspicious transactions. Invoices for services never rendered, foreign consulting fees without tax documentation, and, most telling, shell vendors, all traced back to a holding company called Alpine Innovations, which had been registered just 3 days before Travis was announced as CEO. The pattern was clear now. Travis hadn't brought in Zachary because I was old school. He'd brought him in because they had a system siphoning company funds through fake vendors and consultants, hiding it in complex digital transformation costs that were hard to question in today's business environment. They needed me gone because I asked too many questions, kept too close an eye on the details. I sat back in my chair looking at the evidence laid out before me. For the first time since Patricia died, I felt something beyond the numb routine of daily existence. Not anger exactly, something colder, more focused. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything methodically, cross-referencing, timelines, account trails. I wasn't going to confront Travis. I wasn't going to call an emergency board. Meeting or go to the press, that wasn't my style. No, I would do what I'd always done, let the numbers tell the story. But this time, I'd make sure the right people were listening when they spoke. A week after my departure, I reached out to William Foster directly. Despite his lukewarm goodbye, he'd always been fair. He deserved a chance to address this before it got worse. He called me back the next day. His voice was guarded. Rick, good to hear from you. Travis mentioned you might reach out. My stomach tightened. Did he? Yes, he said you were having trouble transitioning. Said you had some concerns about our new systems that Zachary already addressed. I felt the pit in my stomach deepen. William didn't seem concerned. He was already on Travis's side. William, there are irregularities that predate Zachary's arrival. Significant ones. Silence on the line. Look, Rick, I understand this is difficult. 15 years is a long time, but the board has full confidence in Travis's vision, and Zachary has already streamlined several processes you flagged as problematic. That's not, I began, but he cut me off. I'm afraid I have another call. Perhaps we can catch up at the holiday party. I hear you're still on the invite list. Rick's heart was heavy, but his mind was clear. The storm was brewing around him, yet he had no intention of being swept away. He'd spent the past few months being methodical, careful, gathering evidence and keeping his emotions in check. Now the pressure was beginning to build. The conversation with Bethany had left a knot in his stomach. She had confirmed what he'd suspected all along. The company was falling apart from the inside. Zachary Hughes's digital transformation initiative was nothing more than a front, a sophisticated way to divert funds and leave the old guard in the dust. The restructuring was a decoy, making way for an even darker scheme to siphon off the company's assets. Rick knew the game was changing. Travis had come in like a whirlwind, pushing the board to make rash decisions, but Rick had stayed quiet. He wasn't going to make a scene or blow his chance at redemption. Instead, he was playing the long game. He sat at his kitchen table, sifting through the piles of paperwork, his fingers tracing the numbers that had kept him awake many nights. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the inflated service contracts. It was all so carefully crafted, so well hidden. Yet it wasn't beyond him. He'd always been a numbers man, and the truth was buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. It wasn't just about the money, it was about justice. Patricia would have pushed him to stand up in the boardroom, to confront Travis head-on. But she wasn't here, and Rick had learned to control his fire. His mind was sharp, methodical, patient. That was how he'd built his career, and it was how he would take down the very people who thought they had outsmarted him. Kevin's nervous demeanor haunted him. He knew something was wrong. Kevin had been part of his team for years, and now he was caught in the same web of deceit. But there was no time to focus on Kevin right now. Rick needed leverage, something solid that would make people listen. The SEC call had been unexpected, but it was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. Rick took a deep breath, pressing the send button on his laptop. The email was simple, but had the potential to change everything. He had compiled just enough evidence to spark suspicion without making it too obvious. He wasn't going to accuse anyone directly, that would be foolish. He was going to plant the seeds, watch them grow, and let the truth reveal itself in time. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was Bethany again. They've gone. Further than I thought, Rick. They're targeting the whole department. You need to do something, she said, her voice shaky. Rick could hear the strain in her words, the uncertainty that had settled over her. Don't worry, Bethany, I've got it covered, Rick replied, his voice calm, almost reassuring. Just keep your head down for now. We'll get through this. You'll see. After hanging up, he stared at the email draft that was ready to go. The 3 board members he'd identified as possibly unaware of the scheme, Elaine Morrison, David Patel, and Anthony Wilson, were his only hope. If they could be made aware of the discrepancies, they could take action. Rick couldn't trust anyone else. They were either too intimidated by Travis or too blinded by their loyalty to the new CEO. But he knew something that Travis didn't: how to play the system. He had access to the audit server for a limited time, and he wasn't about to waste it. Rick opened his laptop again and logged in with the emergency credentials he'd set up during his last days at Meridian. He had been careful, setting up the admin account before he left, knowing it could be the one thing that saved him. The server hummed quietly as he navigated through the files. The data was overwhelming, but Rick had already mapped out the network of shell companies. His eyes darted across the screen as he traced every dollar that had been siphoned off through false invoices and consulting fees. He downloaded everything. He could find files, transactions, contracts, making sure it was organized and secure. What he found was far worse than he had imagined. The scope of the operation was staggering. Alpine Innovations wasn't just a single entity. It was part of a much larger network. There were connections between the board members, the new management, and the shell companies that Rick had suspected. All along, Travis wasn't some innovative businessman. He was an insider planted there to orchestrate a corporate heist. The more Rick dug, the clearer the picture became. He had no doubt now this was a premeditated attack on Meridian Manufacturing, and Travis Mercer had been installed to carry it out. But Rick wasn't just going to sit back and watch. He had everything he needed to expose the truth. He copied the files to multiple secure locations, making sure to back up the data in case anyone tried to tamper with it. The last thing he wanted was for the evidence to disappear before he could use it. He set up deadman switches that would automatically send the files to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and a few trusted journalists if anything happened to him. The clock was ticking, and Rick knew that he couldn't wait too long to act. The next step was to meet with the 3 board members. He had to be careful how he framed his concerns. Too direct, and they might shut him down. But if he played it right, he could get them to question everything. They might even be able to help him bring Travis down. Rick was about to hit send on the emails when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Zachary Hughes had a connection to one of the shell companies, Vertex Solutions. It was buried in the incorporation documents, but there it was. Zachary had been a founding partner before being brought into Meridian. That could be the key to everything. If he could prove Zachary's involvement, it would tie him directly to the fraud. Rick leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the evidence before him. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still one more step. He had to make sure that when the time came, the right people would listen. And that meant taking one more risk, contacting the SEC. He picked up the phone and dialed Vanessa Taylor's number, the woman from the SEC who had called him earlier. The ball was in motion now, and there was no turning back.